Welcome back to the Farm Show on Westplex Talk 1045. It is the final edition of the Farm Show on Saturdays. And have I mentioned that tomorrow you can hear a replay of this very episode at 8 a.m. right here on Westplex Talk 1045? If you missed our first segment today, A Block, I mentioned the fact that we will be including agriculture updates during the Brad and John show in John's Top 3. That's the first segment of our Monday through Friday show right here on Westplex Talk 1045. But this show, the weekly show, is going away. Your old friend Johnny Combine is spread just a little bit too thin. We will talk about the thank you portion of this show coming up a little bit later in C Block. But hey, let's get back to my favorite agronomic show, which is Ask the Agronomist. You can find it by going to YouTube and looking up DeKalb Asgrow, Western Illinois. It's a fantastic series, and the star of the show is the great Lance Tarchioni. Let's get back to what Lance was talking about. When we wrapped up, Lance gave an overview of how Bayer is using artificial intelligence to make the agronomists' work a little bit more efficient when they're out in the field. Lance went on to give an update from an internal meeting of what's new with gene editing. We started hearing about gene editing probably a little more than a decade ago, and critics were calling it GMO 2.0, but it's really different than traditional biotechnology. Lance did a really good job of explaining the difference. Have a listen.
We had a really cool update from a really smart guy in our breeding and R&D group on genome editing. So you've probably heard about gene editing. Gene editing is kind of it's a relatively new science. Um, Not as new in the human health field as it is in plant breeding, but basically, we have the technology today to turn on, turn off, change the configuration of the genes that are in the DNA of an organism already. So biotechnology is introducing DNA into a plant that came from a different species. So that's what makes people kind of hinky about biotech, because they're just, DNA is DNA. It's all kind of the same stuff, but there's DNA in this that doesn't exist in that. And you can, if you know what you're doing, you can take a little bit of DNA from this and put it in that and make this do something that it didn't used to be able to do, such as make a particular protein that kills an insect, or make a particular protein that makes that plant resistant to a herbicide. That ability did not exist in the genome of that plant naturally. Well, what gene editing is, it allows you to, do things with the genes that are in the plant already that you can't really accomplish through traditional breeding. Or if you tried to accomplish it through traditional breeding, you would just have to do it millions and millions and millions and millions of times, waiting for the right random miracle to give you what you were trying to get. Versus with gene editing, if you know what you want, you can, within certain parameters, you can make that happen. So it does give us the ability to truly, and we've talked about this before, our breeding program has gone from, you know, selecting the best product to, we now have technology that allows us to design a better product. And so if we know what you want as a customer, it's going to make it a little easier for the seed industry to create what you want. Maybe you want a hybrid that has, super high yield, really good roots, really good grain quality, and is nearly immune to tar spot and southern rust. Kind of thinking about last year. Um, you know, you might never get that through traditional breeding, or you might get 3 out of the 5 things you want, or 4 out of the 5 things you want, or 4.5 out of the 5 things you want. But with this gene editing technology, it's going to be easier to get 5 out of 5 of the things that you want. And so that's some pretty exciting stuff. And it'll be, it'll be a few years before the first corn hybrid that is a product of that comes out, but it's pretty close. We're probably a year or two away from the first products that are have some gene editing in their background in the development of the inbreds that turned into the hybrid that you like hit the market.
Lance also talked about Bayer's experience with new herbicide development, including a name you've heard on this show before, Icafolin.
So the last day was kind of a crop protection day. And so one of the cool things, and I talk about this a lot, one of the cool things about being with Bayer now versus my old Monsanto life is we have a very robust herbicide, not just herbicide, but pesticide discovery program. Monsanto had not been in basic, molecular molecule discovery for, I don't know, decades. Um, we developed a lot of really good formulation technology and made a lot of really good improvements on products that we already had, but we were not discovering new molecules anymore. There's very few people in that business today. You can probably count them on one hand. It's a very expensive business to be in, but the technology that's being used to it's a little bit like the gene editing that's going on in breeding. There's ways you can look at a molecule, but before you even synthesize it, before you've ever tested it, before you've done anything with it, and identify, okay, this is going to be a really toxic thing. It's going to be bad for the environment. It's going to be bad for humans. It's going to be bad for fish. It's going to be bad. It's just not the kind of stuff that is A, it's not going to get approved, and B, not the kind of stuff that Bayer wants to be associated. We would like to have products that are, and I know there's some people out there that say there is no such thing as a safe pesticide. We'll put that argument aside and have that another day. But there are things that can make products safer, and we have a lot of knowledge and understanding around, okay, what kind of molecules are going to be safe. So you can screen out a whole lot of stuff that you don't even need to look at it, because you just know, looking at the molecular structure, that's going to be a baddie. We don't want that. And so they're doing a lot of really cool stuff too, because it's always been looking for a needle in a haystack. And through some of these technology advancements, the haystack's getting smaller, and there's a lot more needles in it, so it's easier to find one. And that was pretty cool. Then we got an update on Icafolin, which that's one of the fancy names. That's a brand new molecule. For a short time, we thought it was going to be a brand new mode of action. It's actually not. It's in a group. Oh shoot! I didn't bring my notes for the meeting with me. It's in a group I've never even heard of before. There's nothing in that group being sold today, but it was. It ended up being classified in a group that had been, previously named and identified from somewhere. But it's a very unique product, works in very unique ways. It's going to require a lot of training because it doesn't look like it's killing anything. It's extremely effective, very exciting product, but it doesn't work like any herbicide you've ever seen before. And it was kind of interesting to look at some of the pictures and look at some of the data that we're getting out of it. We're gonna have to kind of do a lot of education, a lot of training around. Okay, here's what to expect. Here's what it's doing. Here's what you're gonna see. Here, because you really can't tell very easily that the weed is dead for a long time. And so that's going to kind of freak people out, but it's highly, highly, highly effective, and very, very, very exciting new product that'll be probably coming out early-ish next decade. And when you put a year on something, that's that's a pretty specific data point. When you start talking in terms of early, mid, late decade, that gives you a lot of wiggle room there because, technically, you know, until you get to the middle of the decade, you're kind of still in the early part of the decade. So, early decade could be 31, 32, 33. Maybe if things go badly, 34, 35. Until we get to 36, we technically didn't, well, at least until we get to 35, we technically didn't lie when we said early decade. So you get smarter about this stuff, and you learn not to over promise when new products are going to get out, because we
At this internal bear meeting that Lance is discussing here on Ask the Agronomist, Lance said that folks at Bayer had a chance to visit with a director of the EPA. Now, Lance doesn't mention exactly which director for maybe which division this leader of the EPA is, but Lance explained how, in Lance's words, Bayer is partnering with the EPA to get products approved.
we actually had the last presentation we had was kind of scary cool. We actually had a chance to talk with a director of the EPA, which is which is pretty uncommon for lowlings like us to get to talk to a director from EPA. And I think a lot of times farmers kind of have an adversarial view of the EPA. Oh, they're trying to take my stuff away from me. They're trying to prevent me from doing this. They're trying to prevent me from doing that. I want to do things the way I want to. I think the registrants would be the companies that are registering products through EPA. I think people assume that we also have a combative relationship with EPA, and we can at times, but more often we're partnering with EPA to try to get products approved. Now they got things they got to do because they've got other stakeholders they have to answer to, and they can't just do what the farmer wants. They can't just do what Bayer wants. They can't just do what Congress wants. They can't, they can't really do what anybody wants. They're trying to please, how's that saying go? You can't please two masters. Well, the job of the EPA is to please about 10 masters. And that's what makes their job so difficult, and what makes their job so expensive, and what makes their job take so darn long. So it was kind of interesting to, it's a big bureaucracy. One interesting thing we did learn was they were not they didn't stop through the government shutdown. They actually had some money, and actually their budget wasn't empty during the government shutdown. So they were able to work. It was kind of funny. He said some of his people, he's got a lot of people that report to him, and his division, they kept asking, are we still working? We still working? Are we going to be in tomorrow? Are we working next week? He says, just keep coming to work until I tell you different. So they worked all the way through the shutdown, which was nice to hear.
That is nice to hear, Lance. I like to hear about government employees working during a shutdown. That seems to prove that they're not just all a bunch of pointy headed bureaucrats. You know what I mean? Lance also, at this internal Bayer meeting, got to hear about the herbicide pipeline, also fungicides. He'll tell you about 735, and that could even play a role in helping farmers with tar spot.
We got a picture of the broadacre herbicide pipeline, which things even back further than icafolin and other things we're working on, like HT5 and HT6, corn and soybeans. So there's more generations of new products coming. We had a nice update on new fungicide products that we're developing. There's a really good new triazole chemistry that will become a part of Delaro Complete in the relatively near-ish future. That looks like it has really good crop safety on soybeans. So the DAPL effect that we sometimes see from high rates of triazoles in Delaro and Delaro Complete, should take care of that, which will enable better products to be used in the South. That DAPL effect occurs when it's really hot. So if you're spraying fungicide on soybeans in the Delta, and the South, even Southern Illinois, you're probably not using Delara or Delara Complete. As you move north, those become really, really good soybean fungicides, just because you're not going to see that dapple effect when it's super hot. That's caused by the high rate of triazole chemistry that is in Delara and Delara Complete, which is one of the key things that makes it such a great fungicide. But it makes it, a better corn fungicide in some cases. So 735 is the new number given to the new chemistry, the new fungicide that we're working with in development. Efficacy looks really good. It was lights out on Southern Rust and Tar Spot last year. So really, it's going to not only improve the crop safety of Delara and Delara Complete, it will also improve the efficacy of Delara and Delara Complete, which in my humble opinion is already the best there is. So that's good to hear.
Okay, we'll play one more snippet from Ask the Agronomist. And Lance went into Viconic soybeans, the herbicides that will go with them. I should say the herbicides, plural, that you can apply if you grow Viconic seeds. And also, Lance gives a little nod back to the early dicamba days. I don't know if you heard, but at one point, a trait was approved with no chemistry. I wonder if that caused any problems. Lance gives it a nod here.
We talked about Viconic, which we've talked a lot about Viconic on here before. You guys know about Viconic. That's our 5-way stacked soybean that we will hopefully be offering in 2027. And that's going to give you resistance to dicamba, 2,4-D, glufosinate, which is Liberty, glyphosate, which is Roundup, mesotrione, which is Callisto. There's chemistry products that have to be developed with that. That's the other thing that we've got going through the process too. But before we can sell Viconic, we got to get the export approvals on the grain. We also have to get the herbicides registered that go with the soybean trait system. So we won't have them all approved, for 27. There's going to be continuing new products developed, new premixes, different ratios of products, lots of things that will not be done for 27. But we want to have our 2,4-D product. We want to have a mesotrione product. We want to have products specifically labeled for use on Viconic soybeans. Because there's been precedent set before when we sell something to you that is resistant to a herbicide or an active ingredient, and there is no registered active ingredient for that crop, but there are unregistered products that have that same active ingredient in them. Some people, not saying you, but some people feel tempted to, make an off-label application. You shouldn't feel tempted to do that, and we can't really be liable for enabling you to do that. So for that reason, we need the chemistry to go with the trait to avoid, any appearance of impropriety there, as I think the legal term would say.
All right, we're going to wrap it up there. One more time, I'll plug the fact that you can listen to every edition of Ask the Agronomist by going to YouTube and looking up DeKalb Asgrow, Western Illinois. When we come back, it is the very final segment of the Farm Show on Westplex Talk 104.5. We'll be right back.